Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at behind the of When We Invent Disarmer.
We invent a device that disarms violence.
If you want to hear the actual song, then you can check it out by clicking this link or going to my channel and finding it, When We Invent Disarmer. Otherwise, stick around for Behind the Sound. Okay, first let's look at the lyrics and break them down a bit, why I wrote them. So, we start off by saying, take a moment, think about how one day we will invent a device that would disarm violence. Like I said, the whole point behind this is to paint a picture about our future where one day we will invent a device that will disarm violence. And even though that seems really like a fantasy at the moment, if you look at the inventions that have been created over the years, most of them seem like fantasies as well. So the idea behind this is to kind of flesh out this hypothetical, what if we created this device, this disarming device, and to get people to start thinking about it a bit more. Make it seem a little bit more like a reality. And so that's why each of the verses kind of tell a story about one person whose life has been affected by this device in some way. So verse 1 goes, finally he thought, I can simply explore, free to feast and walk the streets of any city, of any country, day or night, not needing to hide the style that he designed. All right, well, the first words here, this is coming directly from my own experience, and it's coming from, so I'm currently living in Mexico City. I'm originally from Australia. The image that we often hear about Mexico and Mexico City is how dangerous it is. Now, I've been living here for 4.5 months, and I can say from experience, it is nowhere near as dangerous as people make it sound. Most people here just want to live and enjoy their lives. Having said that, like any place, there are definitely dangerous places. And because of the state of things here, you do have to be cautious about some things. For example, if you're riding public transport or something like that, you have to protect your pockets. I've been pickpocketed once here, but also being a tourist, especially a Caucasian tourist, I do often feel people staring at me, or I have to be careful about certain areas that I'll go into because I am already kind of an easy target. I've found personally that you do always feel a little bit of that kind of pressure when you're walking out and about, always needing to be a little bit cautious. And so for me, these lines, finally he thought, I can simply explore. It's about, look, if I had this device that I knew would stop anyone from being violent to me, it would mean I could walk around anywhere and not have to think about it. It would mean that I could just be myself and explore and really appreciate the city and the people for what it is, without having that little voice in my head kind of saying, watch your back. Not needing to hide the style that he designed or carry the belongings that he loves. The style that he designed, now that's kind of talking about, I think there's probably a lot of people out there who would love to, wear certain things or dress certain ways, but they're worried that, again, that'll make them a target. And that's not something specifically here in Mexico City, that's everywhere in the world. And of course, there's all the social stigmas that come with that, if you don't dress the right way. But again, I think if we took away the fear of violence, then it would open up a lot of possibilities for people being able to experiment with what they wear and all that kind of thing. Small town, big town, ghetto, paradise, take it all in, the richness of every history. He's finally connected to the veins of the culture in which he lives. This is carrying on from that idea, but look, ghetto paradise is saying no matter where you go, if you didn't have to worry about violence, you could really appreciate each place for what it's good for its own history, because each place has these strengths and weaknesses. And so often people avoid these more rough places because they're more rough and they're a little bit worried about it, but there is a richness of history in all of these places. And I think having a device like this would really open up the world to everyone who wanted to explore it. One day we will invent a device that would disarm violence. Look, this is repeating the first line. It's kind of like a chorus, but not a chorus. It repeats between every verse. However, it changes slightly between every verse, and we'll see that. So we will invent a device that would disarm violence, and one day we will invent a device that would disarm violence. Notice here that I'm using the word will. We will invent a device that will disarm violence. We will. Eventually, we will. People think it's a fantasy, but, you know, eventually it will happen. All right, so let's look at the next verse. She's 16 and was terrified of school, of the bruises they inflicted, physical peer pressure, leaving her conflicted. But knowing now that the punches fall short, she can walk her path without fear. So same thing, she doesn't have to be scared of it anymore. She can be herself a bit more. But this is talking about a school environment, because even though my high school experience wasn't that bad, I know for many people, even just the small pressure of being bullied or beaten up by other people can stop people from really expressing themselves and kind of flourishing and being themselves. But in this situation, she doesn't have to worry about that anymore. And she writes a poem in praise because for 516 days there has been no school suicides, no mass shootings. And when the students are free to flourish, we all flourish. So 516 days. This is giving a time frame to this. Basically, this story is set 516 days after people have started using this device, which means it's, about a year and a half. And in that time, there's been no school suicides, no mass shootings, which are both things that are very prevalent in our current world. So that was included basically to say, look, this is what's going to change. And that won't need to be a problem anymore. And when the students are free to flourish, we all flourish. Because, look, we're all students at some time. And students often have some of the most creative ideas and stuff like that. And so, I feel like a lot of them at the moment are being repressed because they don't want to stand out socially and be threatened by people that think it's uncool or worth, beating them up over. One day we will invent a device that will disarm violence. Look, another repetition there. Let's get it stuck in the listener's head. These days, the nurse can rest at night and not wonder if her boyfriend will come home tonight with drunken fists. First of all, so this is another story. This one's talking about domestic abuse, which I know can be quite a serious issue. And at first I wondered whether to keep it in because out of fear of possibly triggering people who are experiencing this. But in the end, I decided, this is, another problem that would be solved if we could stop violence. And look, that's a very complex issue in itself, but it's definitely something that would be affected. These days, 2 houses down, the builder can wear any shirt in front of the boys without needing to cover up the bruises gifted from his wife. When I first wrote this, actually, the builder can wear any shirt in front of the boys. In my mind, in front of the boys meant in front of his friends. But after I wrote it and recorded it and listened to it, to me, it sounds more like his children, which if he's getting bruises from his wife, from domestic violence, it's something that people often want to hide, but I think especially being a male, it can be a real source of embarrassment because you can be seen as weak, and you don't want your friends to see that, and you don't want your children to see that, which that's a whole other discussion. But yeah, that's what this verse is about. Gifted from his wife that no one suspects, which is often how it happens. No excuses for aggressive physical communication. We all learn to talk. We all learn to listen. That's again saying, look, if some of these people they can't use violence, then what options are left? We have to talk. We have to listen. And these are the 2 cornerstones of relationships. Communication. Then we move on. One day, when we invent a device that disarms violence. All right, so we've emphasized the word when here. Like using the word will, when, this is putting it in the audience's head. This is going to happen. It's just a question of when it happens, And it could be someone listening right now that invents this device. It's going to happen eventually. we go up to the final verse. Midnight gangs and daylight politicians transform into diplomats with fingers on the trigger of their pens. So both gangs and politicians, without being able to use violence, they basically have to use agreements, trade agreements, political agreements, all sorts of compromises and agreements. And then the whole thing becomes more of an intellectual game. A lot of the outcomes that come from these people working together, you know, they have to benefit both parties or benefit as many people involved. There's no more of this, you're wrong and we take over your land through sheer violence, or in the case of gangs, there's no keeping territory through threats and torture and kidnappings and all that kind of thing. You know, it all has to be mutually compatible. With palms clenched and handshakes again, wrestling with agreements, warriors for the future. Things start becoming more future-oriented as well, rather than just protecting what we have right now. This is one of my favourite lines now. Staring nukes in the face as we dismantle them ourselves. Nuclear bombs are one of the scariest things that exist right now. But one day, we won't need to be scared of them. We can stare them directly in the face as we dismantle them ourselves. That's why I wrote that line. But you know, you take away that violence and the threats, well, what happens? We watch the great collapse of the slave trades because they're not being oppressed by people with whips or guns or anything like that anymore. And violent black markets, and then we pick up the shattered fragments and we build a new one that thrives on the growth of our people. Again, if we can't use violence, what's the best way to make money? What's the best way to have a market? It's to help people. So when we invent the device.